for coming this evening to join us in a conversation. Oh, wait. I'm waiting for that picture. Okay. Start again here. Aloha. Mahalo for coming this evening to join us in a conversation about the potential future uses of the Pioneer Mill office building. My name is Theo Morrison, Executive Director of Lahaina Restoration Foundation. I would like to thank the County of Maui Planning Department for funding these meetings and the overall process. To be perfectly clear, this evening's conversation is about potential future uses. There is no developer standing in the wings, and Lahaina Restoration Foundation has no plans for this building. We are here today to listen to what you, the community, want to see happen. There are a lot of challenges facing the use of the building and the restoration of the building. But the conversation this evening will focus on opportunities, on possibilities, and on what you as a community want. Now I will turn the meeting over to Mike Summers from Planning Consultants Hawaii, who will introduce his team and facilitate the conversation.
Okay, and yes, I'm Mike Summers. I'm a land use planning consultant with Planning Consultants Hawaii. We are a Wailuku-based community planning firm. Before I begin, can I just ask if you folks can see the PowerPoint?
No.
No?
No.
So I can see your PowerPoint in editable mode, but not as a slide.
How about ADS? Stanley, you cannot see it?
None. No slides.
So it looks like in our chat, some people can see it.
David, can you see it?
I see it in editable mode, yes.
Okay. It's now in full screen. Stanley, can you not see it?
Nope.
So most of our participants in the chat can see it. So I'm not sure what's up with Stanley.
All I've got is maybe I can exit and come back in.
Yeah, try that and I'll route you back in.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and while doing that, I'm just going to kind of kick this off a little bit. So today we are fortunate. We've got a couple of folks, one in particular, Stanley Solomillo, who is going to be presenting the history of the site. For you folks that don't know Stanley, he was the County of Maui's cultural resources planner for a number of years. And he has extensive experience with historic preservation in Maui County. And so he will be giving us a presentation today of the history of the building. We also have with us Katie Stevens and David Sarame of Hawaii Architects Ltd. Both David and Katie have a lot of experience with historic preservation in Hawaii, and they are very familiar with the process and the opportunities and struggles with rehabilitating historic structures. So I'm just going to move to our agenda for today. And we were given by Theo a pretty good introduction of what the purpose of the meeting is, but essentially, today is an important day because what we'd like to do is to outreach to the community and give an orientation to the community of the site and talk about future uses that might be appropriate for the site, that would fit in well with the surrounding uses and build possibilities for the community. We'd like to talk a little bit about rehabilitation and some of the findings that we have, discovered through this process and make you aware of those. And we'd also like to talk to you about next steps. And so, this is a kind of a unique process for us, doing a Zoom virtual meeting. It's something that, obviously we're all becoming more familiar with, and none of us are, some of us are probably very experienced. I have some experience with this technology. And so, just please be patient should anything come up where we have internet disruptions, or if you have issues with the Zoom features. And I'm going to ask Kimberly to just quickly go through our features. Kimberly, if you could speak to this slide.
Aloha, I'm Kimberly Fluck. I'm the Deputy Executive Director of Lahaina Restoration Foundation. And I am going to do my best to make this Zoom meeting smooth for everyone. So this card kind of tells you some of the key elements that we'll be using throughout the meeting. Most of you will notice that you are currently muted. So that is a design of the meeting. So we will actually unmute people during the conversational portions, but during the informational portions, we'll have everyone muted. So that's number one. So when the time comes to unmute, you're going to use your mute button. If you can choose to have your video going like we do or not, that is up to you guys, but your start video button is number 2 right here. If you look over, number 4 is the participants. If you'd like to see who's in the room, this is what I will be using to call on people to make their comments and ask their questions. We also have the chat feature. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but that'll be a written response kind of possibility. And then we have the reactions feature, which is basically emojis. And then we have the leave meeting. If you need to leave at any point, you can leave. If you want to come back in, just come back in and we'll put you, you'll see in the waiting room, and we'll be able to re-enter you into the meeting if you get cut off or if you need to leave for a little bit. So during this process, we're gonna have kind of 2 possibilities where you may need to communicate with us. If it's something during the informational where you're having issues with your Zoom, or if you have, if you need a little bit of clarification, or if you have a question that you would like answered during the question and answer portion, which will be at the very end of the meeting, we ask that you use the chat function. So you click chat, and then it's just like texting someone or DMing someone. So you can text someone and text the questions. I'll be keeping an eye on that chat. And if it's something that needs immediate response, I'll kind of cut into the meeting. Otherwise, it'll be saved for the Q&A session. A little bit later in the meeting, we will have a conversational section, and that's where we're going to be using spoken conversation. So if you are interested in making a comment during that session, what you're going to need to do is electronically raise your hand. The fun thing with Zoom is it depends on which system you're using on how you raise your hand. So usually on a computer, if you clicked either participants or reactions, you're going to see a button or a link that says raise hand. And that'll let me see next to your name a raised hand, which then I know that you have something to say, and I'll be able to call on you. And I will ask you to unmute, and an ask to unmute kind of message will pop up on your screen. You'll unmute yourself and it'll be your turn to talk. And then when you're done, you'll go back muted, and the next person will be called upon to make their statement. If you're on mobile, it's usually on the extra menu, which is the 3 dots that's up in the corner of your piece. So if you're on a tablet or a phone, if you click that, you'll actually see the raise hand usually under that portion of your menu. So I'm not sure what everybody's using, but hopefully either under participants, reactions, or the extra menu, you'll be able to find the ability to raise hand. If you cannot chat to me during the conversational portions, then I'll be able to get to you that way.
Great. Much, Kimberly. So, with this meeting, as always, we would really like to ask your kokua so that we can have a very productive virtual meeting and get the most out of this time. For your information, this meeting is being recorded. The meeting may be impacted by disruptions. I think I mentioned that earlier. And so again, please be patient. We ask you that you be respectful of others and their opinions and their ideas. And we are going to try to kind of stick to a 3-minute speaking limit. And also, please do not use chat for sidebar conversations. And if you are having problems with Zoom during this presentation, please use chat to notify Kimberly so that we can kind of help you out with that. All right. Okay, so I spoke a little earlier about the purpose of this meeting, but essentially we're doing our due diligence right now, and one obviously critical part of the due diligence for a planning project is getting out very early to the community and asking the community what their thoughts are about how a site is used and what kind of uses would most benefit the community, what kind of concerns the community might have with reuse of a site, and any other suggestions that might make this a successful project. And planning really cannot be done in a vacuum. It can only be successful with community outreach. And so that is why we are here. Now, in order to get the best, I guess, feedback from the community, it's also important just to provide some background information. And I'm sure most of you folks are very familiar with the site and probably the history. So if there's a little repetition, please just be patient. But generally we find that the most useful output is generally received when we give good information and you can make good informed decisions. So this meeting is also about delivering information to you. We would like to open it up and discuss community benefits and potential future uses and get your ideas. Once we have that information, it will be much easier to evaluate those ideas and really look at how those can be implemented and whether they're feasible. And if they are feasible, how we can make those ideas come to life. There are a lot of challenges and opportunities with reusing a site like this, especially with a historic building. And so we do have some ideas about the condition of the building, and we'll speak to those. We are aware that there are issues with asbestos and other kind of situations that typically arise with using older buildings. And we'll discuss that briefly. And then of course, we'll talk about next steps. Just as a way of a little bit of background, you can kind of see from this image that this very dominant site is located really kind of in the heart of Lahaina. It's not in necessarily the commercial core, but it's just Mauka of the commercial core with a very good connection. This property has been used for a very, very long time. So this is not a new site. This site has a lot of history. The Pioneer Mill Company office building has been there since 1910. It was used for many, many decades. So it's really an aberration that it's not being used. And, that is definitely a change. I mean, a big change to the community. The site is 1.86 acres. Now that's a lot bigger than the other land uses directly around it. When the site was originally developed, the sugarcane plantation essentially was adjacent to the site. And over time, as the area developed, those sugar fields were built out with housing. So we have a very different settlement pattern than what we had historically. And right now you can see that this is a pretty significant use right now, the West Maui Senior Service Center or Senior Center. And it's there, it's existing, and a relatively small portion of the site is used by the Pioneer Mill Company office building, which currently doesn't have an active use. You will notice that the Pioneer Mill smokestack is Mackay of the site. That smokestack really kind of at one time was the heart of the mill. It's about 650 feet away, so it's within easy walking distance. And of course, the commercial core of the town is not far at all from this facility. It's directly Mackay. You can kind of get a very good understanding of the land use pattern from this bird's eye perspective. You can see that the great majority of the site, probably about 75% of the site, is the West Maui Senior Center. You have the new building, which was built in about 2004. I'm kind of guessing the EA was done in 2002. You can see the significant amount of land use that is occupied by parking. That would be an accessory use to the principal use, which is the senior center. And then, of course, the Pioneer Mill office building is located on about 25% of the site. It's shielded by the big historic trees on the property. We do, as planners, really need to be thinking about neighboring land uses. And obviously, the West Maui Senior Center is directly impacted by the project, as well as the residences. So any future use, we need to be very cognizant of how we impact those folks. Now, Stanley is going to give an overview of the history, and I'm going to turn this presentation over to him right now. So Stanley, just tell me when you want me to change the slides.
Well, thank you. Mahalo, Mike, and aloha kako. My name is Stanley Solomillo, and I'm an architectural historian residing in Honolulu. I worked for the Maui County Planning Department from 2004 to 2013 and served as staff for the CRC. Next slide, please. The Pioneer Mill Company, or PMCO office, was built in 1910 and is 111 years old. Next slide. It was built in the Ahupua'a of Paunau and the Moku of Lahainaluna. And in the year of its construction, local Mokuhinia and the royal compound of Moku'ula were still in plain sight. Next slide. Lahaina is a sacred place because of Moku'ula. The royal compound established by Chief Pi'ilani sometime in the 1500s, from which he ruled a unified kingdom of Maui. Lahaina was made the capital of the Hawaiian kingdom by King Kamehameha, remained the capital of the kingdom during the reign of Kamehameha II through 1845, when it was moved to Honolulu on Oahu by his successor, Kamehameha III. Next slide, please. Mokuhinia was and is the axis mundi, that point between heaven and earth of the Hawaiian world, where political rule and religious ritual operated in concert from the days of the emergence of the Maui kingdom through the unification of the islands, and then the coming of Christianity into the modern age. However, a lot of this was forgotten in the rush for land, water, and sugar that took over Lahaina when the first predecessor of Pioneer Mill was established in the 1850s. Next slide, please. The PMCO office is one of two extant buildings in Lahaina that are associated with Hackfield and Company and was constructed during its ownership from 1885 to 1918. The second is a wood frame building at the bottom of Lahainaluna Road, currently occupied by Maui Coffee, which served as the office before this building was constructed. The PMCO office is a pre-war German neoclassical design, constructed of board-formed concrete, and is the only extant example of its kind on Maui. Next slide, please. The building is directly associated with German-born managers and other employees who worked for the company prior to World War I. They included two German nationals who both later became US citizens, but could have not been more different. Louis Barkhausen and Louis Weinsheimer. They were like Jekyll and Hyde. Barkhausen was manager from 1905 to 1909 and is remembered for his mistreatment of Issei workers and for the 1905 strike that saw the town placed under martial law. Weinsheimer was manager from 1910 to 1918 and is hardly remembered at all, really. But he was responsible for erecting the PMCO office, providing electricity, potable water, sanitation, and new houses for the workforce. He was replaced when American factors took over the company in the latter year. While Weinsheimer did much good compared to Barkhausen, his one significant error for which he may be criticized was the filling in of Mokuhinia, which was completed in 1917 for public health to eradicate mosquitoes and their potential to spread illnesses such as malaria. Next slide, please. Designed by an unknown engineer or architect, the PMCO office was built by a Kahului contractor named W.J. Moody in 1910 after he relocated to Honolulu. Honolulu photographer R.J. Baker took 2 photographs of the building. Next slide, please. Keep going. There you go. Those photographs were taken after completion in 1910 and in 1915. You will notice that the corner view was later duplicated by multiple photographers, even as late as 2021. Next slide, please. After American Factors acquired PMCO, the company continued its expansion of infrastructure during the 1920s under managers A.W. Collins and Caleb Burns. Next slide. By 1930, PMCO office was one of hundreds of buildings that the company owned in Lahaina, and sugarcane was grown on every empty parcel except on Moku'ula. Next slide, please. An office annex was added to the PMCO office in 1947. It was built by Maui Construction Company, but unlike the 1910 office, no contemporary photographs were taken of it after completion. It housed the company's records on the first floor and an expansive office on the second floor that was finished in koa and used by the plantation manager. Next slide, please. The 1910 office was recorded by photographer Jack Butcher for the Historic American Building Survey, or HADS, in 1966. He did not photograph the office annex because it was not yet 50 years of age. Next slide, please. Following the closure of PMCO, Maui County acquired the building in 2001, and I prepared a nomination for it in 2007. Both the 1910 and 1947 portions of the building were listed in the Hawaii Register of Historic Places in that year, along with site features such as perimeter rock walls that were built by Issei Masons just before the Imperial Japanese Navy attack on Pearl Harbor and its large trees. Next slide, please. The floor plans of the PMCO office and annex were prepared in 2007 as well. The 1910 portion of the building has 2 floors totaling 5,000 square feet. The 1947 office annex also has 2 floors totaling 4,200 square feet, and the combined square footage is 9,200 square feet. Next slide. Following slides are current photographs taken of the PMCO office and site in 2021. This is a view of the PMCO office from the southwest, looking northeast at the site and front facades. The site is dominated by 3 huge trees that dwarf the building, but is generally overgrown and largely unmaintained on the Lahainaluna Road and Pauoa street sides. Next slide. This is a closer view of the building from the southwest, looking northeast. The board-formed concrete facades remain largely intact, with the front and side porticos as well as entry stairs. It has original fenestration, mostly without window glass, along with neoclassical detailing in its bracketed cornice and entry porticos. The side portico has been enclosed for office space, and the side stairs, which historically served as a queuing area for payroll, have been rendered non-functional. Another modification to the building has been the addition of 2 concrete buttresses to provide support for the front facade that were constructed at an indeterminate date. If one compares this photo with those taken in 1910 and 1915, one will notice that the road, now named Pauoa Street, adjacent to the side rock perimeter wall, has been moved westward. Next slide, please. This is a view of the entry to the 1947 office annex from the southeast, looking northwest. The vernacular commercial facade, constructed of concrete block, is intact with a central entry portico and is dominated by a large metal gutter that doubles as a cornice. Although the fenestration has been boarded up on the first floor, it remains in place behind the boards and visible on the second floor. Next slide, please. This is a view of the side facade of the PMCO office and the office annex from the northeast, looking southwest. The facades of the original building and the addition are stepped and intact, along with original fenestration, with the exception of one additional opening in the 1910 portion that appears to have been made in 1947, and there is a metal ladder that provides access to the roof. Next slide, please. This is a view of the site, including the front and side facades of the PMCO office. This time is seen from the west, looking east. Site features such as the 1941 rock walls and end piers, as well as building-related elements such as concrete walkways, side stairs with metal handrails, and side rock walls are visible along with the large trees that provide shade. Next slide. This is another view of the site and the last view from the southwest looking northeast, showing the West Maui Senior Center with the PMCO office in the distance, made discernible by the large trees. Mike?
Dan, that was fantastic. Okay, so before we kind of move into a discussion of future uses, I just kind of want to present to you some of the considerations that you should be thinking about, maybe to ground some of the ideas, but also just to understand how planners look at a site and think about things as they move towards a decision on what might be appropriate for a future use. And obviously, one of the key aspects is just the building itself. And Stan had mentioned that the building has 9,200 square feet, 5,000 of which was constructed in 1910 and 4,200 square feet in 1947. The zoning is especially important. Zoning essentially outlines a list of permitted uses with development standards that you need to comply with when building on a site. In this case, this project area is in the R1 residential district. That is a rather restrictive district in Maui County zoning ordinances. And as you noticed from that aerial imagery that I showed earlier, the district is predominantly for single family residences, but there are other uses that are allowed. And probably the use that's most applicable for this particular building that is outright permitted would be building or premises used by the federal, state, or county governments for public purpose. And a very good example of that would be the West Maui Senior Center. Related to that, somewhat different, but you can also have accessory uses. So, for example, if the West Maui Senior Center needed a future use, this could be considered an accessory use to its principal use if they wanted to use the building. Now, aside from this use, there are some special uses that could be considered. Now, a special use must get a special use permit, which is a public hearing item before the Maui Planning Commission. It's a rather in-depth process because of the kinds of unique impacts that these kinds of uses can have. But some of the special uses listed would be hospitals. Interesting with respect to hospitals, in this particular district, you would need a 75% approval of property owners within 500 feet in order to do a hospital. But there are also nursing or convalescent homes that would be permitted with a special use permit, housing for the aged, housing for low and moderate income families. One of the really important considerations is parking. Any use of this building will be required to provide on-site parking, or it could potentially be provided off-site if it meets certain requirements. But the requirement for general office, as an example, is 1 stall per 500 square feet with a minimum of 3 stalls. So if you were to build out the entire building and fill it up with office space, you would need approximately 18 stalls to accommodate that use. You can have joint use parking. So for example, if the West Maui Senior Center had a period of the day, maybe it was an evening or a Sunday and they never use their parking, well then you could use this building and use the parking that's currently on site during that period when it's not being used by the existing senior center. Most likely, given the current parking environment, it's most likely that land would need to be acquired to provide future parking for reuse of this building. That's an important consideration. Now, as I mentioned before, neighboring uses really need to be considered in the planning process. You know, how would this use impact the West Maui Senior Center? How would it affect single-family residential uses in the neighborhood? So things like traffic and parking and lighting and noise and those kinds of things, those all need to be considered so that you have a use that really benefits the community and doesn't really negatively impact its neighbors. And finally, this is very important to consider, any rehabilitation of this building will require an environmental assessment through the HRS 343 process. It's a very rigorous process that looks at how a use will impact a site and its neighbors and larger community, looking at direct impacts, indirect impacts, cumulative impacts, and there is opportunity for public input. So just some basic considerations to think about when we talk about future uses. So we just going back to the Zoom basics, and I think this would be a good opportunity if anybody has any questions about the Zoom features, or would like to raise their hand because they're having issues with Zoom, this would be a good time to do that. And we do have a little more instructional material here with this slide if you'd like to use it. So I'm going to allow Kimberly to answer any additional questions that folks might have. Are we good?
I'm not seeing anything in the chat. I'm not seeing any raised hands at the moment. So when we get to the asking for input, again, you raise your hand, I pick you, I unmute you. I will try to introduce you. I'm going to base it on your Zoom names. So I may mispronounce, forgive me ahead of time if I do, or I may use a nickname, but basically when I call upon you, you'll be asked to unmute, and then I will introduce you to the panelists by your Zoom name.
Right. Okay. Okay, so basically, we're going to open this up for discussion to the best that we can, using this virtual meeting format. And ideally what we'd like to do is to kind of start a little bit high level, a little bit more visionary, and then we can maybe zoom in on actual specific uses. But, imagine us trying to write some kind of a community use plan for this building, right? So in thinking about that, we kind of want to think about maybe initially, like, why is this a valuable community resource? Why are we proceeding to try to spend time and energy and money and our resources to try to preserve this thing and make it part of our community? What is the reason for that? And so I think, if we can just come up with a handful of ideas for what's driving this effort, that would be helpful to the planning process. Likewise, I think if anybody has any ideas about a vision, and I'm not just talking about, like, geez, wouldn't it be nice to have a donut shop? I mean, an actual vision, like, how is this site going to be used in 5 or 10 or 15 years? I mean, what kind of sense of place would it have in the community? Again, kind of related to the prior question, what would its function be? Like, if you're there 10 or 15 years from now, how would you like to kind of envision seeing this building and this area of the parcel being used? So we'd like to spend a little bit of time on that. And then we would like to go into a discussion of specific uses. Now, it might be most helpful just because we're in the R1 residential district. Now, bear in mind, we can change the zoning. That's not an impossibility. It's about a 3 to 7 year process, but we can do that and open up the window for lots of other uses. But bear in mind, our neighbors are residential. Okay, so we need to think about the neighbors. But in any event, we might want to think about the public uses first. Okay, so A good example of a public use would be the West Maui Senior Center. And then other ideas, we can get a little more creative. But first, let's go back and just talk a little bit about kind of at a more global level, why would we want to preserve this resource? Why is it a valuable community resource? And so if anybody would like to chime in, that would be helpful. And if, for our purposes, if we could get at least 5 or 6 or 7 responses, that would be wonderful. Actually going to go right here. And just, we put in an example here. So for example, why is it a valuable community resource? Well, low-hanging fruit is that it's listed on the Hawaii Register of Historic Places. So do we have any other ideas or suggestions or thoughts about this? Oh, we got a Kathleen. Kimberly, are you able to?
Yeah, I'm unmuted now.
Okay,
I have
great.
Barry here. Barry wants to say something.
Well, it's a valuable resource to the community because just like how the whaling stuff is in the whaling days, Maui and Lahaina especially was also a plantation town. So you kind of stick in that area because in 10, 15 years, the generations not going to even know anything about it.
So it's good to keep it to remember the past.
Can you hear?
Yeah,
Yep.
sure. That's wonderful.
Okay.
All right, thanks.
I appreciate that. That was a very, very, very good response. Do we have any, Richard?
Yes,
Richard?
I would say kind of a unique design when we drive past it, so.
So yeah, it's got great architectural features. Very unique.
All right, Louisa?
Kind of adding on to, I guess, number 2, in that, I mean, it has so much history. I mean, it's a very unique building. And I guess that's on number 3 also. Sorry about that. And I think it can be a tool that helps to kind of provide enrichment, for the community. Just going back to that sense of history and place, providing worthiness, because it's a well-built building. It's quite worthy, has so much history.
Very nice.
All right, Anne Marie?
Hi, I would just add to what everybody else is saying. I think what's valuable about it is that between the smokestack and even the coffee shop that used to be at Pioneer Mill headquarters, there's a small cluster of historic plantation buildings right there that is walkable and of interest. I think it's great if we could take advantage of that little cluster of history.
That's great. Okay, do we have any other comments? Suggestions, ideas?
So in our chat, we have the greenest building is one that's already been built. It's sustainable and green to repurpose old buildings.
Oh, that's wonderful. The greenest building is one that's already been built. That's a great comment. Very, very good comment.
Also in the chat from Lori Gomez Carrot, we have the plantation era is our legacy. It followed the monarchy era and shaped who we are today. Diversity, plantation values, and work ethics.
Okay, and can we save those chat comments? Will they?
Yep, we can save those and we'll have those available.
Okay, that's great, because yeah, I wasn't able to catch all that, but that's wonderful. Okay, we have another, okay. Kalapana?
Anu?
Thank you. I'm on Kalapana's computer. I guess this adds to what Lori was saying, and also thank you to Stanley for including that in the intro in remembering Ku'ula and Mokuhinia and placing this building in the context of a bigger story. That to remember that this is a part of our history, but it's a component of that. And so how are we telling this broader story through this lens? And I think there's great value in taking this opportunity to create a beautiful community space that really proportionately we really need. You know, there's so many things for our visitors in our community in Lahaina, but how many places can we build upon to bring back home for our people?
A great comment.
And I think kind of chiming in with that in the chat also, there is this, the monarchy was first and then came plantation. So allowing this building to tell the deeper story even before the plantation was built.
That's a great comment. And again, since I'm, you know, this is being recorded and your chat messages are being recorded, so if I'm missing things, we can pick it up there. Do we have any more comments? This is fantastic. Suggestions? Oops. Okay, well, let's move on to the vision question. Now, I don't think you can get much more simple than this statement. Share a vision for the future, and we have a statement, an occupiable building. Okay, so that's a very simple vision, but do we have any other kind of like vision statements, really looking at kind of like just your overall sense of place, or thinking about how it relates to the community? I know we touched upon that previously, but sometimes looking at it in the context of just your imagination for what it would become can stir interesting ideas. So do we have anybody that wants to chime in and get a little more creative than an occupiable building? Okay, we've got raised their hand.
Hi. One of the things that struck me is the location of Lahainaluna Road is such a historic center for education, current and past, with the schools that are on the road there, and to encourage education as part of that whole historic, I guess, pod of information there is important. I could see it fitting into an educational type annex.
What are some of the kind of unique features of like an educational kind of facility that you would imagine?
I guess, and I saw somewhere in the information that you provided talking about an art center that it feels lacking on the west side, dramatic arts, music, something that's isn't quite provided yet for both adults and children on the west side.
Okay. Wonderful. All right.
All right, Louisa?
I just love what was just being said, just on that educational component. So I'd want to ditto that as well. I mean, it's, I think if it can be revitalized, certainly culture and arts, you know, the sensory component, respect, just that educational component, history. I mean, there's so many parts to it as well, but I think that performing arts as well could be a great focus.
Okay. We have another hand.
Yep, Anu?
I think this builds on what Anne-Marie and Louisa were saying, but how does the active use of this space, that larger context of story, speak to a living history? And sometimes when people think of history, we think of it in this past tense way, instead of we are a point in a continuing line that is a living thing. So how does the active use express our place in that story?
Wonderful. Sounds great. Do we have any other sense of place visions?
So in the chat, the vision, the building will reflect the period of time, plantation era, to show the beginning of a diverse society. There's some more things in there, but they're more use, so I'll chime in with those when we get to the use section.
Okay. I guess this will be the last call.
Richard and Nancy?
Okay, good.
I could see this as a good complement to the senior center that's already there. Someone mentioned maybe like theater use or something like that, or play production, that if there was some really comfortable seating in there that the seniors might enjoy sitting and watching something on a stage, a little bit elevated, whether it be musical performance or drama or something like that. Just a suggestion.
Okay. And I'm just going to ask a quick question, but you know, obviously the building right now is not being used. We talked about this a little bit as a team today and previously, but even just in the context of its location on that prominent corner on Lahainaluna Road with the very historic trees, does it feel like it's, I mean, is it a lost opportunity just from a, I guess, a sense of place perspective, the way it sits right now? And does anybody have any thoughts about that, or? We got a hand.
Please.
Hi, Mike. I'm sorry. I guess I'm not quite sure what your question is.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is, you know, I mean, and we'll probably talk about this later. So maybe, we don't need to spend too much time on this, but the building right now, the grounds are like, they're dried up, and the trees need some attention, and the building obviously is in need of repair. And yet it's a very, very you can see that the senior center is very well maintained. The trees are beautiful, the landscaping is beautiful.
Yep.
And this space has a very civic feel to it because of its corner orientation to the two streets and the big trees. So just from a sense of place perspective, obviously if it gets a new use, it might be a very beautiful spot. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree, because there's hundreds of people that drive Lahainaluna Road. It's now an access off of the bypass. So you actually have tourists. I see more tourists coming down Lahainaluna Road than I used to. Not complaining, just a fact. But I agree with, I'm sorry, I don't remember who it was that said it, that because you still have existing buildings from the plantation era, like the stack and the old office that the coffee shop is using, you have a great opportunity to create sort of this cohesive area that you could bring people to, and they could see three different things. So I think we should capitalize on that, but not to the point that it becomes so commercialized that you've kind of taken away the tranquil, if you want to call it that, because I live a stone's throw away from the senior center. So you don't want to turn it into something that's going to bring mobs of people. But yeah, you could definitely, back in the day, when the plantation was still operating, it looked a lot nicer than it did now. And there was another building there, the Union, is it
It used to be a clinic before.
the clinic, yeah. So yes, Mike, to answer your question, I think it is a missed opportunity right now that that's why it's worth saving.
And as for uses, I don't want to see anything that generates a high volume of traffic and people.
Yeah.
Is that coming up?
We'll save that for later.
All righty. Okay, well, let's move on to uses now. And we've kind of touched on this, but we can try to be a little more specific. As I mentioned before, public uses that are, I guess, associated with, in this case, the county, because the county is the landowner. Potentially, it could be the state, some kind of a state partnership. Could even potentially be a nonprofit arrangement. But can you think of public uses that would be really appropriate for this building? Things that are just outright permittable, just like the West Maui Senior Center was a permitted use. And you can go back to some of the earlier ideas that you had, and maybe you can explain why those might be public uses or why they may not be public uses. Do we have any hands?
So while we're waiting for people to get their thoughts together, in the chat, kind of building on it was a plantation building. So what things did the plantation supply that this might continue to be able to do? So one was the plantation had a hospital. So a health center might actually reflect a community use and a historic connection to the building.
Okay, and I'm just going to add that is a public use. That is, a very clear public use.
Another was a museum, again, tied to the plantation era.
And, this is likely, one of those uses that, could be public. Kind of depends on how it's, how it's operated and, if it's for profit or nonprofit. It would need a little bit of exploration, but it could certainly possibly fit in as a public use. Okay, we have a hand raised.
So Kathleen?
Couple thoughts is just, offices for county or state. Just low key. We're not talking DMV. And another thought was a daycare center, adult daycare center that would kind of coexist with Kaunoa. Not that Kaunoa would run it, but just sort of in line with the use of Kaunoa being a senior center. I'm envisioning like the Nisei Adult Daycare Center in Kahului, that kind of thing. I don't know if Lahaina has an adult daycare center. You do? But we're a tsunami generation of elders, so I'm sure we could use more.
That's a very, very good point. And, we've had a little bit of discussion, but, the easiest thing to do is, for it to be an accessory use to what's there already on the property. And that's very clearly a community use, would be permitted. You would still have parking issues and things like that that would need to be addressed. So county offices or state offices, does anybody have any ideas of specific, like services that, might be offered? I mean, we mentioned maybe not the Department of Motor Vehicles, but can you think of any like space needs that would benefit the community in Lahaina, that would make things a little more convenient for everybody?
Louisa?
Hello again. I'm thinking for that, maybe the planning department permits, could be educational too, relative to this is what you need to do, but making it convenient, of course, for the people on the west side to handle business on the west side.
That's a really good suggestion.
And I'd love to go back to the museum for a moment too, because I was thinking if that could, because I believe that's a use that many would like to see somehow, and I was trying to figure out how that would tie in, with it being public. But if it was perhaps, operated somehow by the senior center, maybe there could be seniors who would be docents, or there could be maybe an archive. I realized with Lahaina Restoration Foundation, there's the cleaning of historic objects. So maybe it could be somehow tied in with that and have people doing something. Again, it's sort of that performing, active, kind of revitalizing activity. Somehow we could.
That's an incredibly interesting idea. Seniors are very passionate about, the places where they've spent most of their lives. And in fact, if they've lived in Lahaina, that's an interesting concept.
Maybe we could somehow get the kids involved too. Children, I don't know how that would tie in. Probably not a daycare center, but maybe a kids museum. Sometimes they have those hands-on types of things too, that again, then the kids would be excited to go and visit this wonderful building. I think there's a degree of building a respect too for one's, I don't know, sense anyway.
Anu?
Thank you. Yeah, I really agree with what Luisa was saying and also what Kathleen was saying earlier. I don't know if there are organizations that specialize in how to forge or rebuild healthy relationships between Keiki and Kupuna generations. There's such need and value in the wisdom of our elders and the energy of our youth, and rebuilding those connections in a really positive way, but also a low-key acceptable way for the community. I think that's, for me personally, not as a resident of that area, but really with a lot of empathy for what that community wants to see in their neighborhood. But yeah, the bridge building between generations is sounds really enlivening.
That's right. Okay. I'm gonna maybe just, because there's a quiet spot, maybe mention that one of our consultants, one of our team members, David Serrane, mentioned today, and you'll hear from him later, that there's been quite a lot of demand in Honolulu for entrepreneurial workspace or shared space where, you know, folks that want to have office space and cohabitate that space can, you know, find an area that's more affordable. And if it's done in a certain way, that might also be considered a public use, you know, if it's for the purpose of economic development through an economic development agency. Anyway, I thought that was interesting. If anybody's got any ideas about that, I can write it down.
Louisa?
I'm so glad you brought that up, because it is something that I've talked about among various people, and I was thinking, how would that tie, you know, how could we do it? Because would it really be a public thing? But I would agree that there are individuals, organizations that don't have meeting spaces, and maybe it could be, again, something run through the senior center. But if it didn't have to be, you know, it could be a way, if it was a kind of membership run, you know, it would be a way to also bring money into the system to help pay for whatever it is, whether it's utilities, cleaning, you know, post-COVID, still sanitation is going to be more important. But I think those shared spaces would be, I can think of certainly organizations that would just go, yeah, that would be great. A place for a monthly meeting. And many of these organizations are serving a purpose for the community. So it's kind of full circle.
Well, and don't we have something like that in Lahaina? Or I'm sorry, in Wailuku on Market Street? There is a co-working space, I believe, with conference rooms, and it's very affordable. And it's a very, you know, nice spot. I can't recall what the name of it was, but that is public use, I think.
And I'm not aware of it, but if it could just be transplanted, that would be great. Or if we could have one on the west side.
Yeah, it's pretty successful.
Great.
It's a very nice space. I've had meetings there. Actually contemplated having an office there when I first started. So, and Stanley might know the name of that building, the organization that runs it.
I don't, unfortunately. I'm sorry.
Okay, and David, did you, if you can hear me, did you want to chime in on that particular use? Because I know you're the one that brought it up.
Well, I only mentioned it because it's something that's happening here quite often. It's something that could be, used in many different capacities. It could be used for the community. It could be used as a operating entity, maker space. If it's for something that's, as we trend towards working and people staying home and working, it seems like it's a sort of a good fit for a multi-use space. You can take a desk there, you can do a month, you can do a week, you can do a day, you can have meeting spaces, but it's basically geared towards small entrepreneurial startup companies or people who don't have a full-fledged office or are working remotely. There are some government groups that do this exact same thing. They develop spaces for this purpose.
Can you define what maker space is?
So makerspace is, there's 3D printers if you're going to print prototypes of your widget or whatever that thing may be that you're working on, and you need to send it to people to sell it, or you need to send it to people to show them what it is, or a fabrication area, places where you can lay down and cut material. Maybe there's any kind, like a workshop space. So they come in various different sizes and scales, but maker spaces can be anything from like a high-end tech to basket weaving type material, or even cooking, preparing stuff, prep kitchen type stuff. So makerspace kind of goes across the whole board, but at the same time, it also is a creative space where people will paint and sculpt, and there's tools there to do woodworking and things like that. So it has a variety of different uses, you could say, for the community, both the small entrepreneurial spirit startup company and somebody who, you wanted to teach a class on pottery or something like that, some creative aspect.
Yeah. A lot of young folks are gravitating towards being digital nomads or digital, but they like to
Exactly.
be together periodically.
Yes.
And energy around them, so.
Yeah. So the digital nomad portion of it, I mean, I actually know people who they have memberships to these kind of networks that are all over the country, and they sit down, they work on their coding for whatever 2 weeks, and then they're off for 2 months, and they're on to their next thing, whatever it might be. But as they kind of advance and they leave their nomadic lifestyle, they gravitate towards these. WeWork is a perfect example. You rent a space. You have a space where you can sit your computer down, plug you in. There's also a co-working space. WeWork, WROK. It's a company.
That's
No,
interesting.
work is in like.
Oh, WeWork.
WeWork, yes.
Okay.
That's just one brand that has kind of risen out of this. But here we have Box Jelly. We have the Sandbox Kakaako is the new one that we have right here, and it's like a large space where you can go in, you can sit down. They've got Wi-Fi, they've got coffee, they've got printers. For $85 a month, you can have a sit-down station.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and like I said, I mean, that potentially could be a public space too. I mean, if it's run out of the Office of Economic Development or something like that for entrepreneurs. Okay. Do we have any other ideas for potential public kind of uses? We have a hand raised.
Kalani?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Awesome. Mahalo. My name is Kailani, and I drive by the building every day, and I've longed to see this building become a resource center for our community. I see children walk by every day that have to walk up and down to school, community members who walk by, and the housing area is all around this building. And I work up at Lahainaluna. I teach social studies, and I would love to see this building become a resource center for the community that has technology, books, like old books that aren't digitized, the museum concept, but not only the plantation, also the Hawaiian Cultural Museum. There is a plantation era museum in the wharf, and but not to dismiss anybody's suggestions, just to mention. Sorry, I came late to the meeting. I was in a class, so if I'm being redundant, I apologize. But I really want to express the need for a resource center. We have the community library down on Front Street that is. You can never get in there and use a computer. There are people in there they're always on the computers. There are not enough computers. Our children cannot get to the library. This is right where the children can get to, the kupuna can get to. And as a resource center, it's in line with a lot of the other suggestions here. But I would highly appreciate it as a resource center for community needs, to do research, to do to work on computers where there's a Wi-Fi center, and a networking of the kupuna and all the generations networking together here. Thank you. I think that was, yeah, the resource center with the museum and library and places where people can do research. Those were the three elements that I really wanted to bring forth. Thank you so much.
Oh, that's fantastic. Very helpful. Okay, do we have any additional ideas? And don't forget, you can, if you've got some other ideas but not publicly, we can go there too. I did make some space for that.
So in the chat, we have kind of a restatement of the performance center idea.
Okay, I'm just going to stick it here and we can figure it. Okay. Was there any kind of discussion of what kind of a performance center? Or does it just say performance center?
To teach arts and sell their wares.
Okay, great. Okay.
Yeah, so it's kind of that makerspace kind of concept, but with arts.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And then a kind of additional on the health center, a place for vaccinations, wellness classes, alternative medicine, mental and physical wellness for kapuna and children.
It's a great idea. Okay. Okay, so I don't see a hand raised real quick. We're going to move on to the building condition. So your last chance. We can always come back here if something dawns on you at the end of the meeting. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Architects Hawaii. We have David Serrane and Katie Stevens here. So it's all yours, David.
So I think actually, yeah, I think actually I'll speak first.
Oh, that's right. Katie's
yeah.
gonna start it.
Thanks.
Right.
Yeah, if you could go on to the next slide, please.
Okay.
So as Stanley mentioned previously, the Pioneer Mill office building was listed on the Hawaii Register of Historic Places in 2007. And it was listed for its significance for several reasons. As part of the Pioneer Sugar Mill, which was a significant part of Maui's history, as the first board form concrete building and the third concrete building to be built on Maui, for its association with significant persons in Hawaii's history, for retaining distinctive characteristics of a type of construction and architectural style, and also for retaining the integrity of its historic character defining features. So integrity is defined by the Secretary of Interior Standards for Historic Properties, and that's the national industry standard for rehabilitation, restoration, and preservation work. And because the character defining features are part of what makes this building significant, we would need to preserve or repair these in any project which is undertaken at the building. So the character defining features are those that are unique to the structure or that typify the architectural style. And for this building, these include elements such as the concrete interior walls, the parapet wall at the roof with the decorative frieze, the entry porticos with the tapered square columns, the circle vents with the wood louvers, the windows, the doors, and the transoms, and the particular style that they are, like the double hung windows, the exterior stairs and landings, and the way that they approach the building name and the date which is in raised letters on the front of the building, and those lava rock walls in the front of the building. Can you go to the next slide, please? So, yep. So in this, you can see some of those elements here. The upper left picture is the really interesting lava rock walls that are in the front. The upper right picture, you can see there's sort of that entry portico, the circle louver vents, the windows and doors in the front, and that front parapet wall. The bottom left picture shows one of the side doors with the transom above and the wooden windows next to it. The picture on the bottom right is some of the double hung wood windows. And on the picture in the middle on the bottom, that's a side view of the building. You can see the parapet walls there. So these are the things that we would need to either preserve or repair so that they are how they were originally put onto the building. I'll now turn this over to David Serrane, who's going to talk about the actual condition of the building.
Thank you, Katie. So we went through, we did just a few different high level roofs, windows, doors, interiors. I'm just going to give a very, very brief overview. The windows and doors, almost all but one of the doors need to be replaced with something that's not plywood. The front doors are the only remaining doors that are original that would be salvageable. Windows themselves, all of the sashes would need to be either partially rebuilt or repaired significantly. The frames themselves of the windows, we'd have to have extensive customized windows put in, or for replacing custom pieces of the wood windows. Next slide. The interior, the second floor has been retrofit. I think in 1947, there was some steel reinforcement that was put in, and there was some reframing that was done. The steel appears to be in very good shape, but the roof itself has some leaks that are active or were active. They've been patched since. We still have to tend to some of the rafters and roof substrate that would be repaired, would have to be repaired. So this would also take place in the top right is the portico image that any of the roofs that are outside of the main frame of the building, they have extensive repairs to both the wood, the framing, and the roofing membrane. Next slide. On the interiors, the next couple of slides are interior photographs. And this one is just specific to, or not specific, general to the electrical, mechanical, plumbing systems that are currently in the building. They'd all have to be modernized up to some code standards today. Next slide. This is just some general overviews of the interior. The bottom left image is the lower level. That's, I beg your pardon.
Did I lose you? Hold on for a minute. I'm sorry about that.
I think so. So we were briefly discussing the maker space or the creative spaces or some kind of community space. The lower level appears to be slightly more inclined to that use. It has smaller windows. It does have access. We'd have to have some sort of ramping in place, but the space on the bottom left, it's a fairly large space. So there is some benefit to redoing the cellar level. The upper level on the top, which is the main level of the building, is in pretty good shape. The interiors, as you can see from the other 4 photographs, they just need some work done, that's all. The interiors would need heavy restoration work, renovation. Then the last slide is the site. And so there's some site conditions, that railings on the top right that need to be replaced. Handrails would need to be added and upgraded. We need to, level out some of the steps there so there's a little more consistency in the steps. The sidewalks would need to be redone so that there weren't tripping hazards. And then most curious is that in the top left photograph, there is no sidewalk in front of this building. So the sidewalk would have to be installed for the standards today. So it would continue the sidewalk that actually was redone at the senior center all the way to the curb and even around the corner. That's it for me, Mike.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of quickly go through the next steps and then we will allow for questions. And we still have quite a bit of time left to answer questions and go back to the uses if folks have other ideas. So anyway, we've had this meeting. Prior to this meeting, we were doing due diligence, gathering information, researching the site, preparing ourselves for this meeting. We will have a second meeting on May 8th, and the intent is to give a presentation that's similar to this meeting. There may be some refinements to the meeting. If possible, we may summarize some of the output that originated from this meeting tonight. But it will largely be the same. So if folks missed this meeting, they will have the opportunity to participate on the 8th. We will then process the results from the community meetings and develop some draft recommendations. And once we develop draft recommendations, we will host a third meeting to share those and to ask for your input on those recommendations. We will then go back and revise the recommendations to reflect the community input and prepare a community use plan. So that is essentially the, I guess, task list for the next couple of months. And with that, do we have any questions? So please raise your hand if you would like to ask a question, or if you have another use that you'd like to recommend.
So Kailani in the chat added something to her resource center concept. She would like a place to record memories and to place digitized pictures or old books. Basically an oral history, video history center where people could record and then see what's been recorded.
Oh, that's great. Okay, do we have any other uses or questions for the consultant team about the project itself?
So I just have a question for David really quick. So he was pointing out a lot of the surface and concern areas, but could you tell us about the overall health of the building?
Yes, I'm sorry I didn't mention that earlier. Yeah, the overall structure of the building is in very good shape. The foundation is in good shape. The walls are in good shape. The roof will need to be replaced, but that's just appropriate for a building of this age. Everything else is in, as far as we can tell, there's no major cracking, there's no shifting, there's no settlement. The building is in very good condition.
Thank you.
All right, do we have any other questions?
Louisa?
Hello again, thank you. I'm just wondering where in this process that the finance part comes up, because I love all these great ideas and yet there's a cost for all of them. So, and the fact that it is it's on the state registry, tax credits, hopefully getting on the national for more tax credits, but when do you talk about that part as far as funding?
Right, so, there will be a discussion of finding or a discussion of funding in the community use plan. And we will explore, some of the opportunities that might be available for doing some of these improvements, probably in a more general way. We will talk to, the need to essentially have the uses in the building pay for themselves. I think, once it's determined that a specific use is appropriate for the site, I think that will probably create a lot of opportunities for funding, depending upon who that use is servicing and, the interest in the folks that are actually going to be promoting the use, developing funding to do the use. So, this is probably going to be, the issue of funding will be probably addressed at a fairly high level in this community use plan. But if Thea would like to speak to that, or Kimberly.
Well, that all comes later. What we need, we don't want to get bogged down. It's going to cost a lot of money, but that shouldn't hamper what we plan or what we dream or what we want. So there's lots of opportunities. There's lots of, like the tax credits, there's all kinds of federal grants for things like this, but the main thing now is to come up with the use, because the use that the community wants, because that will determine the other steps as we move forward. So that's why we're focusing on this, why this whole meeting process is about what the community wants and the uses that they want to see in this building. That's where it starts, and we start with the big ideas. Money, it'll come. It's not a problem.
Anybody else want to chime in on that or have any comments?
I mean, it's such a unique building that alone, you can get funding for something like this. It's just obviously it needs to be saved. There's no question about it. So it's just a matter of doing it.
Okay, we have another question or comment?
Louisa?
Just me again. I do want to say thank you to that, because I'm certainly all in favor of saving, revitalizing, doing whatever we can for this building. And I think people in the community might ask, well, who's going to pay for it? So that's great. I like what you said, Theo, that the money will come. And I just think that with it being on, again, the state register and hopefully the national register, that those credits may come to play and ease the cost at some manner. But again, thank you. Just wanted to make sure. I do realize that this is the visioning part, but just didn't know when we would be talking about that. So thank you. Mahalo.
Kailani?
Mahalo, Kim. I wasn't sure. I can't see myself. I don't know if my hand's up. Aloha again. Theo, I appreciate your positivity and that the community wants and goals will drive the use. When you let the people with the money decide, and then it's no longer the community's decision. Bravo, Maika Ilo. The money will come. Mahalo for letting the community decide.
Any other questions or comments or suggestions? We still have a few more minutes. I hate to finish early.
It's okay.
Theo, did you want to say anything about next steps?
No, I think you said it all. I do want to just say a little bit more about the money situation. I'm not just making that up. The last project we did, the Harborfront project, the very same question came up, and my answer was very the same, what I just said. And we actually, we planned the project. We came up with a nice drawings. It's a much smaller project. So I'm talking about the area at the Harborfront and also the Apuke'au little kalo patch thing that we most recently did. But altogether, it was $1,120,000 something. And we got the money because we had a project, the community was behind it, and the county just gave us the money to make it happen. So that's my track record. This works. Starting with the community first and getting the backing of the community and then going to get the money. It's the way to make it happen. And we've had a lot of success doing that. I'm totally confident in that process.
Right. Okay, so I guess we're POW, unless.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so thank you so much for your input tonight and for taking time out of your very, very busy schedules and providing your mana'o. We really, really, really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Couldn't do it without you. And with that, again, we'll have another meeting on May 8th. And you're more than welcome to, of course, join that meeting as well and tell other folks about this meeting and what we're doing and encourage them to join that meeting. And we look forward to it. So, Theo,
I'd like to chime in on that. So if you have the link and would like to share it, please feel free if you have the May 8th link. Also, you can have anyone that's interested that as you spread the word, they can contact me, Kimberly at lahainarestoration.org. I'd also like to offer that email To anyone who sleeps on this and comes up with other ideas or questions, feel free to contact me using my email, kimberly@lahainarestoration.org, and I can pass it along to the rest of the panelists.
Theo, any final comments?
So no, I just thank everybody for coming, and it was a really good experience. Of course, we're always nervous before we do these things, especially doing this Zoom stuff. But yeah, it's great. It's exciting. I love stuff like this. This is how you make things happen. So thank you very much for coming.